Hello and welcome to an extremely exciting episode of Diminishing Returns this week. We are covering a rom-com, which is very unusual for us.
Yeah.
And joining myself, Sol, and Alan,
Hello,
is one of our most exciting guests yet, I think, Dr. Wendy Walsh.
Well, I'm glad I'm exciting to you.
I'm so excited. I was just telling Alan before, we've had quite a few guests that I've been really happy about having on recently.
yeah, and every time he says this is the most exciting one, he's trying to up himself every time.
That is true. But I think the last few times I've been saying, these people are great, they do great work, and their podcast is great, you should check it out. But this is the first time where I myself am a dedicated listener, and I genuinely...
Really? Is that how you found me from Mating Matters?
It is, yes. It's been my one of my lockdown shows. I started at the beginning and I've nearly caught up. I've just got to the point where you started recording in the lockdown.
You did it the right way. You know that, right? With podcasts, people are supposed to go to the beginning because they build on what they believe is an information base the audience is taking in.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to, fetishes and fantasies and that genetic sexual attraction, but then you've already got the foundation of the biological and evolutionary underpinnings of human mating strategy. So by the time you get into the weird and wacky, you're like, oh, I get that. That's something gone awry from evolution.
But no, it's genuinely a really great show. I can't recommend it enough to our listeners. And most of our listeners being sort of... I think our demographic skews towards teenage boys, probably more than anything.
It definitely skews towards people who aren't good at relationships.
Well, if your teenage boys are smart, they're going to want to listen to Mating Matters because it is the science of human mating strategy.
Oh, completely. And now more than ever, I think, with the way the world is and modern dating apps and things, it's fascinating to hear how everything's changed. For our listeners who don't know Dr. Wendy Walsh, you're sort of... I'd call you an anthropologist, really. I see you often called a relationships expert and a sort of social scientist almost. Is there a label that you use?
I think of myself as a journalist. What I am best at, and I am a journalist. I was a local news anchor for years and a reporter for years. And now I got a midlife PhD in clinical psychology. And while I was there, I became obsessed with not only evolutionary psychology, but an area called attachment theory, the ways people attach or not across the lifespan. And so I wrote 3 books on our adult romantic attachments, our intimate relationships, but I write for the mass market because I know the language of people. And what I'm very good at is translating information from anthropology, evolutionary biology, sociology, and getting rid of all the psychobabble and putting it in words that everybody can access.
Nice.
Well, hopefully we're going to have a bit of that on today's episode.
I do like a bit of popular science. I'm very kind of scientifically minded, but I don't want to put the work in. So having popular science for me, this popular science section and community is perfect for me. It's just like I need it. I just want it boiled down. I want to have the basic information, and then I will just wildly speculate on my own after that.
Exactly. And it's the topic that everybody is interested in because we are put on the planet to reproduce. And those who are unable to reproduce, unless they're a great alloparent and help with their sister's kids, their genes fall out of evolution's chain.
Yeah. That's why we're total failures on this show, I'm afraid.
So finding a mate, attracting a mate, retaining a mate, and sometimes expelling a bad mate is the business of being a human.
So that's why I was going to say you chose actually our film this week, Pretty Woman. I asked you if anything sprung to mind that would be good to talk about from a sort of mating strategy point of view. I think you suggested Love Actually, which was a great pick actually, but we covered it a few years back on our Christmas special. And then you came back with Pretty Woman, which is Yeah, great choice, because I actually hadn't seen Pretty Woman before the other day when I watched it for this recording, despite it being a real classic.
Clearly, you are not a girl. I mean, that's as important to a girl's repertoire as Mean Girls, which would have been another choice, a great one.
Oh, that's a great one, yeah. I mean, I suppose if there is a weakness in my film knowledge, I mean, I suppose it's probably Bollywood cinema, but after that, it's rom-coms. And I am trying to change that. I've seen a few recently. I watched Shakespeare in Love the other week, and it was surprisingly all right.
No, it wasn't.
I thought
you were wrong about that. But yeah, I that's interesting that Pretty Woman it's a woman's film, I guess. It's a film for women, but written and directed by men, obviously, because, you know.
It's Cinderella, just like A Star is Born. It is every woman's rescue fantasy under patriarchy. And I do believe, I was going to say, I don't think that movie could be made today, except that then we had A Star is Born again. And I'm like, there we go again, rescued by the big man.
It reminded me of My Fair Lady, which I guess is it Pygmalion?
Yes.
There's a couple of very deliberate references to My Fair Lady and Audrey Hepburn, but also, yeah, there's that kind of idea of her being transformed, but then ultimately she transforms him.
Well, kind of. You know, the truth is,
Yeah.
you know, there's so many flaws in this movie. The first being, of course, a man buying a woman for a week and her being thrilled and putting her head under the bathtub, just screaming in joy.
Right, $3,000 is $3,000.
Yes, and the second thing is that she's supposed to be this lovable prostitute, and they throw in a tiny little scene to make us feel good about what she does for a living, and it's where she's with her prostitute friend, and they were having a bad night, and they couldn't find a John, and she said, maybe we should get this pimp. And her friend says, no, we choose when, how much, and with who. We choose. Like there's this feminist moment for 30
empowered.
Seconds.
I understand that the film was conceived of and written as quite a dark drama, and it sort of got put through the Hollywood system and turned into a sort of frothy rom-com. And you know, so along the way, the big thing I read was that Julia Roberts' character had a pretty severe, debilitating cocaine addiction in the original version of the film, which I think would probably have made it play a bit more realistically.
But then they're also saying, you see, she's really damaged and really needs a man to save her. You know, she really needs this guy. There's no way. And then the comedy comes because then they do the classic, you mentioned Pygmalion, My Fair Lady, the classic fish out of water story, right? Like somehow, because she's a prostitute, she doesn't fit in with his horse racing society, and he's kind of hiding her, but then she's just adorably cute and everyone kind of accepts her. And the other thing, I mean, flaws on every level. First of all, a man at that level would have so many beautiful women who would be happy to be on his arm, no strings attached, for almost free. Right? The fact that he'd have to purchase a woman for a week so that he would have no headaches while he's going to his social events is bizarre. And then the other thing, there's also a market of very high-end prostitutes who seamlessly fit into his community that he doesn't need to pull a fish out of water.
But he seems to be purposely playing games almost. I did find it very odd because obviously I knew what this film was about going in, and I didn't really know what to expect because I had a similar thing when I watched Risky Business for the first time, which is it's basically a film where Tom Cruise hires a prostitute as a teenager from what I remember, but I just find it so bizarre whenever I come across a kind of mainstream Hollywood film that doesn't demonize sex work. It kind of I expect to see, you know, a film where it's just grim and horrible, and instead it's treated like quite light-hearted. You know,
does it really? Because what the movie's really saying is you'll never really fit in unless you change because of this crazy thing you do for a living. And also, there's no sex in the movie, really.
Yeah. I suppose what I'm saying is it's weird to me that we're asked to be on Richard Gere's side in the film and he's treated like a hero because, I don't know, I think most films tackling this sort of subject matter would make him a villain for you know, doing what he does.
That's my point. He's an awful lawbreaker, right?
Yeah.
Now, the only movie that was done in modern times about prostitutes, which did a kind of better job, but it had its own flaws and mistakes, is it called The Hustle? or The Hustler, Jennifer Lopez.
Oh, Hustlers.
Hustlers,
Yeah,
Jennifer
yeah.
Lopez, right? So that movie was hard for me because while they tried to empower these women dancers, exotic dancers who had no, their business was gone with the big, the economic downturn. And so they would drug some of these high rollers, get their credit cards, which were mostly business credit cards anyway, and the debt was wiped away for most of them, but not all. One guy lost his house over it. And the reason why that movie bothered me, I like that it empowered these highly sexy women, but it made them as bad as the men. I mean, literally, when you drug somebody, that's rape, you know? And they turned, I couldn't be on the side of these women because they were doing these awful things.
Yeah, that was the problem I had with that film as well. I just couldn't warm to the characters.
Yeah. And here they were trying to show like, okay, they're in power now. These women using their sexuality, they're actually in power, but they weren't. They were awful people who did terrible things and supposedly based on a true story.
Well, I think in terms of Pretty Woman, yeah, what my main problem with the film is that I don't like anyone in it. The characters all just annoy me in one way or another. That includes the Julia Roberts character,
Really?
who is obviously supposed to be the one we like. Yeah, do you know what? This is a slight aside. I don't think I've ever seen a film with Julia Roberts in and liked her. Like, I think as an actor, she's fine, but it seems like every character I've ever seen her play, I just hated. I don't know if that's something ingrained in me or...
I've never understood the thing with Julia Roberts and how she's, she was the highest paid star in Hollywood for a while, was she? Or the highest paid actress?
I think it's just because she was the first one who blew up her lips.
Oh.
And they had all those close-ups of those big lips. She did a movie... a few movies later, I can't remember what it was called, where she was in a bad marriage. There's violence, and I think she may even murder her husband. But I swear that whole movie was just close-ups of giant lips. I was like, wow, they're really... And she set the trend for the rest of Hollywood.
But I must say, I kind of get it, having seen Pretty Woman now. I do see how... I mean, this was her big breakout role, I guess. I kind of get her now, I think. It kind of all clicked into place. And I can't say I hated her character or anything. She did seem like very much a sort of manic pixie dream girl archetype who, but then the whole film seems to be dealing in this kind of fairy tale fantasy that's glossing over the reality of the situations that it's dealing with.
Exactly. I mean, that's why the movie's so frustrating because a street prostitute like her isn't going to be lovable and joyful and cute and, we can just take her home to mom. She's going to have had a rough life and maybe self-medicating against the pain, right? I mean, we're not talking about high-end call girl here. We're talking about standing on the street in thigh-high boots, going to strangers in their cars. This is not a good life for anybody. And I want to say to all the sex workers out there who are working hard to unionize, working hard to become legal. It is valid employment. If a man can use their muscles to get a construction job that I couldn't do, then I can use my body to get a job that he can't do, right? I'm fine with that. But this kind of unregulated, illegal, at this point, street prostitute, these women do not live a good life. That's the first thing. Secondly, that he's such a lawbreaker, and nobody nods to that, and that he has such control over her. He could literally buy her body, her soul, her time, her attention for so little money.
That really struck me, yeah. The amount was... There's a point in the film where he's negotiating with her for the whole night as opposed to just an hour, and she says to him, you couldn't afford it, and he says, how much? And then she says $300. And I mean, I know it's 1990, but I mean, I could afford $300, and I'm not a high-rolling guy in a high-end suite. I could afford, I think that was about $600 in 1990. And it's just, I assume that's written that way to show, how little she has, that figure appears to be a monumental sum. That
scene annoyed me to some extent because by the time we get to that point, she's already in the penthouse hotel suite. Like, she knows he's money, right? So... jack up the price, first of all. Like, come on.
But I think that's the idea, that she has no concept of that amount of money. Yeah,
she knows that hotel suite costs more than $300 a night for a start, right? So I think when she says you can't afford me, that's showing us her personality. She's a little bit little bit, she's not willing to give up too easily. She kind of wants to fight a little bit because she doesn't want to just roll over and go, hey, buy me, I'm fine, I'm yours.
But it's such a token. It's token power.
But and it's kind of ultimately pathetic because the amount of fight she can put up against this guy is nothing, really.
It's heartbreaking. I was reading this study, little aside, I can't remember if it was out of like Sweden or the Netherlands, and it was on who are the people in modern times who actually pay for sex, because, sex is so available right now to everybody. And it actually tends to be lower income men and much older men. And the researchers suggest this is because they have less access to mates.
Well, that makes sense, yeah. Because like you said, this rich guy, this 80s yuppie guy, he's got access. He's the most eligible bachelor in town. They even say that in the film.
Yeah, these are not the guys who buy prostitutes off the street.
But he doesn't go curb crawling, the film makes a point of saying, oh, it was all an accident. He was in the wrong part of town because he was lost, and she just comes over chatting. He wants directions. And it kind of bends over backwards to accommodate the idea that he isn't your typical John.
He just fell into this situation.
Yeah. And again, it's part of why this film feels quite insincere, I suppose. But then at the same time, I suppose it wouldn't really work as a film if he was just going out to get his kicks and
right, because then we wouldn't cheer for her to get him and transform him into a boyfriend, right? He has to be boyfriend material in every theater goer's eyes. And I have to say, like, the fact that that was a hit movie, that women adored him and adored this situation, speaks to how the system of patriarchy is even ingrained in women. Now, I want to put my evolutionary psychology hat on right now and quote some work of Dr. David Buss at the University of Texas, Austin, who's an evolutionary psychologist. And, it's very unpopular to think about this right now, but he makes a pretty clear case that women created patriarchy. And they did so by selecting male mates, because women do the choosing, by the way. Ladies, if you're out there, you're the big old egg that's sitting there taking applications. They're the fast-swimming sperm who better have some energy and chase you. Okay, just saying. Stop texting him. What he makes a case is that women chose men who hoarded resources. And men figured out, keep the resources, the money, and I'll get women to come to me. And so then it became an arms race where women, during the vulnerable years of pregnancy and nursing and child-rearing, said, well, it's really hard to carry the baby and collect the food at the same time. This guy over there is hoarding a pile of food or gold bars or stock market stocks. I'll just hang out with him and get a bit of that while I'm busy doing this very hard work of keeping this baby. So now what we're seeing is patriarchy becoming deconstructed in our culture as women are surging ahead economically, as we have left, hunter-gatherer onto farming, and then the industrial age, and now into the information age. Women are uniquely suited to extract resources from the environment. We are better talkers, texters. We have better social sensitivity, right? And so women are needed and are surging ahead. And so men are now trying to figure out the new system. And I would say the young men who are adapting are figuring out how to keep their manhood intact so they attract alpha women, but how to be a supporter of alpha women.
That's one of the most interesting things I heard on one of the episodes of Mating Matters I listened to the other day was you were saying that you've heard a lot of anecdotal evidence of young men kind of trying to attract women with messages about how good they are at doing the laundry and the ironing and that sort of thing.
Literally, a young man contacted me on a dating app one point, and he wrote, "You should know that I know how to fold a fitted sheet perfectly." And I swear I got a flutter in my stomach. I really did.
This is a very interesting point, though. I think, in terms of our culture as a whole, and by that I guess I mean kind of Western culture of UK and America, really. We're like 100 years in to a time when the place of women in society really significantly changed. And obviously that is continuing to progress.
It's at hyperspeed right now. The last 10 years have been pretty nuts.
But it's a really weird period of adjustment, and there's been a lot of kind of casualties along the way and all that sort of thing. It feels like good progress. But yeah, when things change so quickly, people get left behind. And like I just speak from my own kind of generational difference to my parents. Like obviously their attitudes are different to mine. Mm-hmm. And I consider my parents to be quite progressive and liberal in their own way from their background, you know, compared to their parents. But these things change so quickly now. And like we were talking about earlier, I'm only 36. I don't feel like I relate to people of the generation below me already. And I don't mean in terms of gender representation, I guess, but just in general, you know. As a psychological expert or as a human nature expert, do you find that people as they get older find it more difficult to change, or is it just that you're not part of the world that is changing? Does that make sense?
See, I was going to ask Wendy to psychoanalyze you a bit anyway, Alan, so I'm glad you brought it on yourself. Alan is staunchly against any sort of commitment or monogamy, or he's a bit of an interesting case.
Well, I think I just want to say globally, and then I can talk specifically about relationship ideas. But globally, let me say this, that the brain has neuroplasticity across the lifespan, and we have the capacity to change across the lifespan. The problem is a lot of our core beliefs and values are tied into our particular generation, and it is also part of our identity. So for instance, I'll notice my kids who are age 17 and 22, rather than trying to educate me, what is this thing going on with WandaVision right now? But they rather than even having the conversation, they love to keep me out in the cold. Yes. And say, no, that's not for you. This is our area, Mom. You can't know about this. So there's partly protection of their identity, as we would protect our identity with our values. But let me say also, now let's talk about relationships. So when your parents were up and coming, they believed in till death do us part, and they may have actually used those words at their wedding ceremony, right? Now, you got to remember that when till death do us part was invented, death was pretty imminent. If you got married in the year 1900, the average length of that marriage was 12 years.
Wow.
If you got married in 1990, the average length of that marriage is 12 years. We're separating because of divorce now instead of death. Exactly. So this idea that you will meet one mate early in your young adult life, you will say, I do, and you will stay together till one of you dies, does not make sense when our life expectancies continue to rise, right? In 1900, believe it or not, life expectancy was the age of 38. And so it doesn't mean we all got old and decrepit at 38. It just meant there was a lot of infant mortality and lots of disease and blah, blah, blah. So now, because of our really long life expectancies, where the vast majority of people can expect to live into their 70s or even their 80s, you're going to see that even of the most monogamous humans, and we have the widest range of sexual behavior of any primate, but even of the most monogamous humans, you're going to see 2 or even 3 long stints of monogamy with some mate selection in between. We call that dating. And that's why you see dating apps that cater to every age group. And so the answer to whether it's like you don't want to change, it's like, you know, your peer group has its set of rules around relationships that are different from your parents, but maybe not as gender fluid and sexual orientation fluid as Gen Y.
Okay, let's try and drag our way back to the film.
To bring it back to the film a bit. I mean, the plot, it's quite straightforward. As I said before, Richard Gere, he gets lost on his way to this hotel in LA. He ends up picking up Julia Roberts, who's a street corner prostitute. He asks her for directions. She charges him money to show him where he wants to go, and they get talking, and he just ends up picking her up for the night. And the film, you know, from that point on, basically just becomes this rich, you know, infinitely wealthy man spending loads of money on the woman, and that's where it becomes this kind of fairy tale, a kind of fantasy, I suppose, for the audience. But I have to say, as a man watching it, I kind of got into the fantasy of it as well, because I was thinking, man, it would be so nice to be able to just kind of, meet someone
and control them with money.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, just spend untold amounts of money on them, So I do kind of get how it was a hugely successful film. I suppose it had that amount of cross appeal. There was a point partway through the film where Richard Gere became a bit nastier, and that broke down for me a bit. It was like, oh, actually, I don't want to be this man.
Well, that's it. We quite quickly set up that he's like asset stripping companies or whatever they do, these 80s gecko types. He buys a company that's not doing that well, strips it apart and sells it for parts. Even in this film, that's shown as a bit of a shitty thing to do. He's making money and he's very successful, but in a kind of obnoxious banker kind of way.
But that's his character arc, is that he learns to be a better person and therefore changes what he does for a living.
I was watching this and I was thinking, they're obviously setting him up as like he's doing this kind of bad stuff and he's going to change by the end and do something nice. But then I thought, actually, this is like Reagan's America. Like, I don't even know if this is deliberately setting him up as a bad guy. Maybe we're still supposed to like him because
that was probably the cool thing then.
Yeah, because like you say, it's Gordon Gekko, isn't it? Like, and I know he's not really supposed to be a nice guy in that either, but people, the yuppies, they like that. They look at that and go, oh yeah, cool, I'm getting a briefcase.
Well, they still do it now. The Wolf of Wall Street, the amount of people who think he's a cool guy, Leonardo DiCaprio in that film, someone to aspire to, when, the film is demonizing him, really.
And then, of course, the whole plot could not be done today because simply from driving navigation. He would never need to know any stops and ask for directions.
He'd have to come up with another excuse when the police arrested him.
Exactly.
But yeah, so then what happens? I suppose he spends lots of money on her. She has this gradual sort of attempt to, quotes, better herself, but she runs into opposition from famously the clerks in a clothing store that won't serve her, the hotel manager, but she ultimately assimilates, becomes someone of this, quote, kind of high class that can fit in with Richard Gere and his social bubble. She's not. She's dressed in the right clothes and superficial knowledge to kind of get by at dinner or whatever. It would definitely have been nicer to have... There's a moment where Ralph Bellamy's character... He sees that she's struggling with the cutlery, and so he makes her he goes, oh yeah, I never know what to use either. Like, he just makes her feel okay about it. It would have been nice to have, and that's because we're showing him as he's this lovely, lovable, CEO, as they all are, I'm sure, who really cares about his workers before he destroys the company. But a bit more of that, like that would have been a nice journey, that she feels out of place. But actually, do you know what? We're not. There might be a couple of bitchy people in the store or whatever, but people are generally quite accepting. And if you're a bit out of place, to go, hey, let me help you out with that. That would have been nice. That would have been a nice journey. Well, my favourite aspect of the film actually was the hotel manager. Yeah, exactly. Hector Elizondo plays this guy, and it would have been so easy to make him a horrible, sneering Tim Curry. Yeah, Tim Curry in Home Alone 2, of course. But he's actually, you can make the argument that he's facilitating a lot of unpleasant things and turning a blind eye where he shouldn't. But the way he plays it, he's really warm and actually quite kind. So there's the one character you can like. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think he was. Yeah. But yeah, obviously, he's like, look, I know you're a prostitute. Everyone knows you're a prostitute. But it's a classy hotel, all right? Keep it discreet. Let's wear something a bit more appropriate. And then, like, they get chatting, and like her charm that this whole film is based on, that she's actually quite a likable person. He sees that, and he's like, oh, do you know what? I'm going to help her out. And it seems very genuine. It doesn't seem completely. Like he's helping because, oh, well, I'm the hotel manager, and if my richest client wants to get a sex worker dressed up as fancy clothes, I'm going to help him. Well, he's rooting for them both at the end. He kind of hints that he can tell Richard Gere where she lives at the end, so he can go and make a big, hold the boombox up to the window moment to try and win her heart. We'll come on to that. But I actually thought the cast in this film overall was great. You know, not specifically Richard Gere and Julia Roberts, but just all the supporting faces. You know, it seemed to be populated with the cast of various US sitcoms that I loved growing up. But you know, you have Hank Azaria very briefly at the start playing was he a policeman? And you've got the old guy from Friends and the sort of cranky neighbour. You've got Jason Alexander in there as Richard Gere's horrible. He's not his friend, is he? He's his lawyer. Is that right?
And of course, Laura San Giacomo as her compatriot prostitute friend.
Do you know what? Right, actually, not only did I really like that character, but at the end, when Julia Roberts is going to leave, she's going back to Georgia or whatever, and you know she's going to try and reboot her life, and she's leaving her friend behind. The emotional goodbye between them felt so sincere and genuine, and it came straight after the scene where she'd said goodbye to Richard Gere, which felt so like empty and insincere. And it was like, oh, I have so much more belief in this relationship. I care so much more about these two than the whole Richard Gere, Julia Roberts thing, which I don't think is good for a film. That's what they were aiming for.
Well, I think that women, remember, the audience here are women, and women really value those female relationships. They're so much part of our identity.
When we go for the like Pretty Woman montage,
I was waiting for the song to kick in from the first second of the film.
Where they go shopping and he says, look, the only thing you need to get good service around here is a credit card. The guy, I can't remember his name, but the guy who's the shop manager or whatever he is, he's in loads of sitcoms and stuff. You see him all the time. He's the one who's basically, how much would you like me to suck up to you today, sir? Oh, yes, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Just absolutely, it was such a over-the-top comedy moment. Even in a sitcom, even in a rom-com, it was higher comedy. It was a sitcom moment, but he played it perfectly. It was a nice little moment in the 80s, in an 80s kind of film. I appreciate this film was made in 1990. It is the most 80s film I've ever seen.
I know. Well, I'm assuming it was probably filmed in 89, do you think? And then released in 1990? Yeah.
So I moved to Los Angeles from Toronto in 88. And let's see, I was like an entertainment reporter for like HBO or something in 92. Julia Roberts and Pretty Woman was still such a hot topic that we did one time, I don't know what it was. It was pre-Academy Awards. We actually went into the same store on Rodeo Drive and we recreated the scene with me. Like I just wore all these different dresses of the time. And we put the music, the Roy Orbison Pretty Woman music, and it was a piece we were doing on what the stars might wear tomorrow for the Oscars or something. Right, yeah. But we did almost a parody of that scene because that's how popular and what everyone identified with that scene. It was iconic, exactly.
And I mean, of course, Julia Roberts was nominated for an Oscar for this film, which is quite unusual, really, for the sort of film that it is.
Yeah, I think this was the Academy saying, okay, here's our breakout it girl.
When the moments where she has to have some emotion, she nails it. It's spot on. And Richard Gere is kind of, by design, not doing anything. That's kind of the point of the character, that he doesn't show anything. I don't know if I think he does what he's supposed to do, but it's not an opportunity to shine as an actor, is it?
Basically, he, as I say, she kind of assimilates enough that she's getting by in his social bubble, and then, you know, they fall in love. That's basically what happens. And there's a scene where
this annoys me as well.
She tells him that she loves him, and
does she?
I think it's post-coitus, but like they're lying in bed.
Oh, you can't
together.
Trust anything anyone says at that point.
But she says, "I love you," and he doesn't say anything. He's just completely silent, and she takes that really well to say it's quite a rude thing to just ignore.
It's, you know what they say, if you can't say anything good, don't say anything at all.
But then she lays into him the following day for telling Jason Alexander that he's hired her.
Oh yeah, that's the high point of the film, isn't it, where they're really getting on. She's having fun.
Like, why are we supposed to like him if he's treating her that way? I have a funny story. The first time I told my boyfriend I loved him was at a gas station. he was pumping gas, and I'd never had a guy get out of the car on the passenger side on my car and start just pumping gas without being prompted, just jumped out. And I looked at him, we'd been together a number of months, and I just said, oh my God, I love you. And he looked at me and said, you're going to do this at a gas station? I am going to wait until we can be in a more romantic place, okay? He still teases me about that.
Hey, Jim and Pam from The Office got engaged at a gas station.
He loves to tease me, but he had the comeback, you know, instead of saying nothing because he wasn't ready. He's like, don't do it now. I need to be in a really romantic space for me to say it.
So now you're impressed by a man who can fold a sheet, but back then it was just being able to pump gas.
Oh,
That's
see,
my
standards were so low. Just if you can hold the handle of a gas nozzle, dude, you're up.
Yeah, they get to the end of their engagement a week, was it? And he basically lets her go, tells her to go away. She's really hurt by it. And then he decides that actually he does love her and rushes to her house to say so.
Every rom-com...
I realise I've just skipped past the point where Jason Alexander sexually assaults her. It's a really unpleasant scene that kind of comes out of nowhere.
Well, you know, she has to need rescuing, right? And we have to perceive her as a victim. But every single rom-com always has an all is lost moment. And when she leaves, that's this movie's all is lost moment. There has to be a moment where the female viewers in the theater think, even though we know he's coming back, we have to think, what if he doesn't come back? Oh my goodness.
I mean, I suppose that's a failing of the film insofar as there's not really any plot conflict until quite far along, because they get along really well for the most part until he starts being a bit shitty with her, and that, you know, that's a good hour and a quarter into the film before he starts to be a bit more controlling and
But I don't know what they seen each other up at that point. Like, all the time they spent together, she's watching the TV and he's like making phone calls and doing business. Why? At what point do we believe they've fallen for each other? Yeah,
we don't want this sweet audience to ever think that actually he's tying her up and doing everything he can with her body because that's what he's paid for.
Yeah, like surely the whole point of hiring a prostitute is that you don't get emotionally involved. Like that's
what he says. Yeah,
maybe that's my point of view. If I was going to do it, the worst thing about sex for me is dealing with the other person, you know, like that's the crappy bit.
Okay, we really do need to have some therapy here. I will say, for if there's anybody on the planet who doesn't know this, especially young women, men have a very different experience with their sexual psychology than women do. Yeah. Women their bodies emit a lot of neurohormones linked to attachment. So, for instance, they release a lot of oxytocin, which is the same hormone emitted during breastfeeding to help her bond with her baby. So women have a little harder. And when I say women, I'm generalizing, of course, because there's always going to be, we have the widest range of sexual behavior of any primate, so there's always going to be some women who are able to hook up and not care. But there are far more men who can hook up and not care. And it is because the release of they also release some oxytocin, but then they release testosterone during sex, which blunts the effect of oxytocin. So it's almost like sleeping with a guy early is a prescription for him not to fall in love, because guys fall in love through the release of norepinephrine, the big love hormone, but it's slow to build. And that's why men will say, I just wanted to court you longer. I mean, they'll complain that they don't get the sex quick enough, but they don't mean it. If they really want a long-term relationship, they want to have the opportunity to chase. They want to have the opportunity to date. And this is what women, as they're deconstructing patriarchy, are having such a hard time with, because they're taking their cues, now that they have the money and the power, from a male model of dating. They're walking around in female biology, but they're calling guys, they're paying, they're doing things, and guys are shriveling and running away.
I mean, if anybody wants to buy me dinner, I'm all right with that.
Now, this is the first Richard Gere film we've done on this podcast, and I just feel like I would be remiss with Dr. Wendy Walsh on the show if I didn't bring up the bizarre rumours that have plagued his career.
Are we talking about gerbils?
Yeah, yes.
I actually was living in Los Angeles when the rumors hit, and I heard them from manicurists and hairdressers before I heard them from high up people in the industry. And that's why I personally believe it's an urban legend. Because urban legends go from the street up. Real rumors go from the top down.
I mean, I can't imagine anyone actually does that anyway. It just sounds so...
Not a practical thing to do, is it?
All sides wanted him. And so he was as attractive to men as he was women. And so I think there's a skit on Saturday Night Live where it's sort of like a gay talk show. And no matter what, it's like two gay talk show hosts. And no matter what guest comes on to talk about whatever's going on in their life, they go, you know what your problem is? You're actually gay. Like they make everybody gay who ends up on the thing, right? And I think that's what this was. It's like they wanted to make him gay. And I actually don't know about his sexuality, if it's fluid, if he's gay, straight, bi. I mean, we all are on the Kinsey scale somewhere, and we move along the Kinsey scale across the lifespan as our circles of people change, our access to partners change, as our hormones change. I mean, women, for instance, when their estrogen goes down and their testosterone goes up later in life, are more likely to practice same-sex behavior, right? I don't know what the answer is, not that it matters. All sides wanted him. He was so hot.
So yeah, thanks so much, Wendy. Really, it's been a joy. This has been great. it's been like listening to Mating Matters in my headphones. And yeah, so I mean, as I say, I really can't recommend Mating Matters enough to our listeners. Is there anything else you'd like to plug?
Well, they can always follow me on social media everywhere. The handle is at Dr. Wendy Walsh, and I do a live stream once a week on Wednesday night Pacific time. So I guess the people in the UK say they're eating breakfast while they're watching me. And always send me your relationship questions, and I answer them either on air, protecting your anonymity. And I'm really proud of my podcast, Mating Matters, because I do a lot of research for it. Thank you. Nice to meet you guys.
You too.
Yeah,
Thank you
likewise.
very much. So yeah, so just the two of us alone now. Yeah, just a couple of things that I made notes of. I thought that I guess I'll bring up. I know I looked up the writer of this. Because apart from anything else, I wanted to say, is this a man that wrote this? It seems like it was a man. But this is the man who went on to write things like Under Siege and Chain Reaction with Keanu Reeves. So, you know, he's really got a good... he really knows how to write for women, I guess. An odd CV he's got there. And yeah, I thought we could talk a little bit about Julia Roberts. We've kind of talked about her before, but just in terms of where she was in her career. Oh, interestingly, you know how when you look at the IMDb trivia, it always says like, oh, so-and-so turned down the part, so-and-so auditioned for this part. And it's mostly, you know, nonsense or whatever. Or probably true, but not interesting. One of them, it said, oh, Drew Barrymore auditioned for this part. But they decided she was too young for the part.
I was gonna say
she must have been very young. I looked her up. She was 14 when this film was made.
So it's gonna be like Taxi Driver, was it?
That definitely would have changed the tone of the film. Oh, but mentioning Taxi Driver there, apparently Jodie Foster was sort of at one point, you know, being courted for the role, which I think could have, I can see that. But that perhaps was when it was a bit of a darker, grittier thing, maybe.
Yeah, well, Jodie Foster... I mean, I suppose this is a beat we've hit repeatedly this episode, but I haven't quite hit the nail on the head, as it were. But I suppose really my main issue with the film was that it just didn't feel not sincere, but it didn't ring true. And I think it's, you know, it's what Wendy was saying is you wouldn't find a street corner prostitute who is just a clean cut manic pixie dream girl, no drug problems,
no emotional problems. Well, you know, relatively speaking.
Yeah, exactly. She just probably wouldn't be this character, and I think Jodie Foster would have played in a way that does ring true, in that she's, you know, in the nicest possible way. I don't mean this as an insult, but she's just got a bit of a harsher edge. You know, she's got her voice is a bit more harsh.
Grit. It's grit. It's got more grit to it. The film as a whole needed that. Yeah, it was just a bit too squeaky clean.
But then I don't know if the film did need that, because I think that would make it a very different film, and it probably wouldn't work. You know, it's a bit of grit there, and suddenly Richard Gere becomes completely unlikable, beyond the kind of way that he's presented, and the whole thing becomes depressing. And like, as it stands, I think the film does largely work as a bit of fairy tale nonsense, and you have to completely ignore reality and switch off a part of your brain for it to do that job. But you know, I think taken for what it is, I think it does kind of do it very well. I think it's quite a good example of its genre. As bizarre as it is that the fantasy being put forward for all the, you know, women in the audience who can put themselves in the role involves fantasizing that you're a prostitute.
It is really straight down the middle as a film. Like you say, I think it's a very good example as a kind of stock, this is your basic spine of a stupid rom-com.
It is, except it's about prostitution, which is really bizarre, don't you think? That's just so weird. Because that to me says, oh, this is going to be a rom-com with a bit of bite. They're going to do something a bit more subversive then. But then they don't. But then I suppose the film isn't really about prostitution, is it? It's just a rom-com. It doesn't really grapple with the subject matter in any meaningful way. It's just superficially...
Yeah,
you know,
that's a point of conflict for them. You know, it's when it comes time to pay her at the end of the week or whatever. Which, incidentally, when they have that moment where, you know, it's the end of the week, he's going to go, he's kind of made a bit of a move already. He said, like, hey, go to New York, I'll get you an apartment. And she's like, she doesn't want to be kind of bought in that way. And so she's going to leave. And he makes one last effort, like, just, no, stay, please stay. And she's like, no, you know, it's not going to work. And they have a bit of an emotional moment, and then she walks away. And then obviously 10 minutes later, we do the big sort of final scene. But at that moment, obviously I knew it wasn't going to end there, but I was thinking this would be a really nice ending. Do you know what? We've connected. We've found a common ground that we never thought we would. We've discovered things about ourselves, and we've kind of learned and grown in some way. There's still too many hurdles. We're just from different worlds. We want different things. Let's let it be what it was in this moment. That would have been a beautiful ending, or much more beautiful than the one we got.
I mean, yeah, Richard Gere himself has apparently said that he doesn't think that relationship's going to end well.
Of course not.
I think there was an interview where they asked what, you know, where are Edward and Vivian now or something. And it's like, well, yeah, of course that's not going to work out. It's unless she submits to a life of, you know, essentially being his employee.
Well, that's it, because basically by the end, he's the one who's fundamentally changing his personality to fit with her. But we at least sort of make the effort to go, you know what, he's a nice guy at heart, but he's just been stuck in this world too long, and now he's going to go, do you know what, I'm going to use my power for good and help companies instead of destroying them or whatever. And it's like, okay, maybe that was inside him all along, but, you know.
That's his big character arc, is that he goes from being a nasty businessman to an ethical businessman at the very end.
One of those.
You know, he's not. I don't think he's going to give back all the billions of dollars he made from exploiting less fortunate people than him. But you know, he's got his money. It's like Tony Stark. You know, we can just wipe the slate clean for all the war arms. And, yeah, like that doesn't matter because he's good from this point onwards, and that's all that matters.
Do you think, right, in terms of casting? Because all I was thinking is like, what if Jason Alexander was playing the main male role?
Well, I think it would be a lot more realistic.
He's more realistic looking kind of businessman. Like, he's not a Hollywood sexy guy. He's a sort of short, chubby, balding guy, and he's got a kind of whiny voice. So even if he had the same personality as the Richard Gere character, like he wasn't playing it like the kind of annoying dick he is, it's just that it wouldn't work, would it? Because the superficial nature of it's just a sexy guy is not there. And obviously the same goes for Julia Roberts. You know, she's got to be an attractive woman. But it did just make me think, because he's just too sexy, isn't he? He's just like, he's too much of an eligible bachelor.
Talking about that, I know it was, I mean, set in the 90s, but basically set in the 80s. Yeah. But the outfit she's wearing on that street corner... What's that about? She looks like Lilu out of The Fifth Element. Is that a sexy outfit? Is that... And the other thing was, you know, I wouldn't look at her in that outfit in this film and think, oh, it's a prostitute. Do you know what I mean? Well, no, she looks like what I think of as, you know, 1980s club goer or something. Yeah. She just looks like she's on a night out. But I guess that's my perception of the 80s. What
should a prostitute dress like for you to recognise it? What are you looking for?
I don't know, like knee pads? Do they wear knee pads? on the street. I don't know.
That's just a health and safety regulation now. Back off Brussels. Did you notice, right? Because there's a lot of stuff with her, the way she dresses, she's getting new clothes and all that, and makes sure she's got the perfect outfit for dinner. And then he comes back from work, and she's waiting for him in the bar, and she's like, "You're late." And you're like, "Oh, right, you're sexy. Let's go to dinner." And he goes straight to dinner. He doesn't even get changed. He's wearing his office suit that he's wearing all day to the dinner.
It's a good suit. That's expensive.
Yeah, but he's obviously got more than one good suit.
Nah, you spend the money, and instead of buying 2 suits, he spent twice as much on 1 suit.
That's why he's got a yacht. It's because he didn't buy all those suits.
Look, it's a common thing, Alan, right? You don't get rich from wasting the pennies. The people who make loads of money are wealthy because they look after every little expense, and that goes for not wasting water as well. He is used to showering once a week at best because he's a miser, he's a Scrooge.
That's it. He takes her home. He takes her home, like, after picks her up on the street. He's been at work all night. They come home. He takes his jacket off. He leaves his waistcoat on. Like, no one's ever left a waistcoat on for comfort. It's ridiculous. And then he's working. They finally have sex. Well, she gives him a blowy near the end of the night. He hasn't had a shower. Like, he hasn't... I think they could have at least put a scene in where he nips to the loo and just rinses his cock off in the sink, as a gentleman would. But yeah, he's a slob, I think is the point.
Yeah, but he doesn't have to be a prim, well-presented guy, does he? He's, loaded. And he obviously, is your classic guy with more money than sense, doesn't understand that just because people say something's good makes it so. He's there ordering... Do you see that meal they ordered? This is meant to be like an amazing high-class slap-up meal. It's meant to be incredible that she gets dressed up for. Right, and course 1 was like a little bit of bread with some cucumber and tuna or something.
Get that anyway.
Yeah. And like it didn't look particularly good. Didn't appeal to me anyway. Course 2, escargot. Yeah, to be fair, those are massive shells for those snails, but there's no salad or anything. It's like, you not even got a side salad, mate. No. Eat some vegetables, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
And then the dessert, you think, the dessert. Just like a tiny little pea of mint ice cream. Pathetic, man.
That was the 80s though, isn't it? It's nouveau cuisine, everyone's taking coke and anorexic, so you got to keep it light.
Yeah, but then I suppose I go too far the other way. If I was him, I'd be like bringing Burger King into the restaurant for them to serve on a platter, like paying the waiters off to give me a Whopper.
I've made that mistake though. You get a pizza and then it's like, I'm too full to have sex now, I can't do anything.
You want to time it just right.
Yeah, you need to carb load before sex.
The most like romantic thing anyone's ever done for me was when my partner at the time successfully timed everything so that we basically finished doing it, and then there was a ring at the door and it was a pizza that had been secretly ordered pre-coitus.
Was she looking at her phone and it was like, the delivery is on its way, it's with the driver. You're like, you better hurry up.
I guess so. It was obviously a very dangerous game we were playing. It was literally like within a span of 2 or 3 minutes. It was like, oh my god. And it was just I didn't want food before, but there was a pizza there. Oh, it was perfect. Anyway,
the perfect would have been like you finish, you sort of collapse onto the bed in that. Just 10 seconds after finishing, and then the pizza man pops out of the wardrobe. He's been waiting
broccoli
there.
Pizza.
Yeah, Cubby Broccoli turns up. That's by the way, if you join our Cubby Broccoli's Better Things Club, one of the perks is after sex, Cubby Broccoli will pop out of your wardrobe and slap you on the arse and say good game. That's one of the perks.
Well, I suppose here's as good a place as any to plug our Patreon. Yes, if you've enjoyed this episode and you're thinking, I'd like some more of that, actually.
If you think, they should get better guests, help us get better guests.
Yeah. If you've enjoyed hearing Wendy Walsh on today's show, and I do think she's been terrific, one of our best yet. Yeah. No offence, Calvin, but you might want to step your game up a bit, mate. But yes, if you've enjoyed this, of course we have a back catalogue of about 250 odd episodes available.
Well, it'll be less than that now.
A good 30 or so are behind our Patreon paywall. Head to Patreon if you want to see those. Patreon.com/dimreturns. And for as little as £1 a month, you will get access to a load of bonuses. There's 3 tiers. that middle tier is your sweet spot. That's the one where you get the back catalogue and bonus episodes, diminisodes, all sorts of cool little goodies and content. So go check that out. Oh, and if you are new to the show and don't want to spend any money on us yet, just go to dimreturns.com and check out some other episodes.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot. Just
Yeah,
go like, oh, that's a film I like. Yeah, I'll check that out. That's a film I like. Because this is what I actually did. I didn't say there while Wendy was here, but this is what I did with Mating Matters. Was I just looked at all the episodes and I went, oh, that's a lot, and I picked 3 out that kind of sounded interesting. And I listened to them and I was like, yeah, that's a really good show. And then I went back to the very start and worked my way through from the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so that's what you should do. You should have a look at ours, go, right, this was good. Oh, they've also done a Teen Wolf with Jeff B. Davis. Oh, that sounds good. Check them out. And once you're sold on it, go back to the start. Done. So, Pretty Woman.
Yeah, so let's do some ratings for Pretty Woman. What did you think?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm flying completely against the grain with our discussion today, but I went into this film expecting to find it incredibly problematic beyond what it was, you know, in a way that kind of leaps out at you. Whereas, you know, I don't think the film is, for the most part, a difficult watch where it like jumps out and you're like, what the fuck? Do you know what I mean? I think it gets away with it, even though if you think about it, it is a bit problematic.
Yeah. It's
not like when I watch Goldfinger and James Bond, you know, rapes a woman in the first 20 minutes and it's just like, what the fuck? What? This is our hero? It's not like that. So I think it largely gets away with what it's doing, and I could just take it for what it is, which is a rom-com. And I do think that, you know, for the most part, I do not particularly care for the rom-com genre. But I think this one was great for what it was doing, taken at its own level. I think this is about as good a rom-com as I'm ever going to find before we get into the territory of films like Bridesmaids, which are technically rom-coms, but they're kind of more comedies. If we ignore them, look at like proper, what you think of as rom-com. I think this is about as good as it's ever going to get for me. So I'm giving it a 7 out of 10, and quite a sturdy one.
Well, I know what you mean. And I think you're right. It works as a film. The structure's all there. The characters are there. But it's a very basic setup and everything. And like it's like they're just hitting these archetypes. And like straight down to, you know, like the cinematography, I noticed it was like, I liked the cinematography, but every shot, every frame, every lighting was straight down the line, 80s Hollywood style. Like it was just straightforward. Everything's just really straightforward. And that's okay. There's a place for that. And this is the place, commercial Hollywood films, right? But yeah, it just annoyed me too much. And this idea that you either don't like each other or you're in love forever. Like those are the two options in films. And I gave it a 5.
Well, I suppose, Alan, should we pitch a sequel? We haven't done that in a while. That's something we're meant to do on the show. Pitch the follow-up to this film. I am actually interested to talk about this just because this strikes me like a film that's due for some sort of modern, not remake perhaps, but reimagining. And Wendy mentioned the film Hustlers earlier as almost like a spiritual reimagining of it. But yeah, I just kind of, did you not get those vibes? Like this just seems like we're going to get maybe not a gender swapped remake, but like a modern update of some sort.
I was just thinking that if they haven't already, someone's going to do a musical of this.
Oh God, I bet it's already happened.
Yeah, I mean, it seems likely.
Let me look it up. Here we are, Pretty Woman the musical. Debuted 13th of March 2018, so I bet one of the last musicals before the world ended. Do you think it went down well?
No. I bet it bombed after did a 3-week run.
Premiered in Chicago, made a Broadway debut about 6 months later.
That's standard practice, isn't it?
Standard, isn't it? Yeah. Appears to be original music with Pretty Woman. Oh, Pretty Woman thrown in at the very end.
Of course, yeah.
Here we are. Critical reception. Generally poorly reviewed. Critics found that the gender dynamics of the movie's plot had aged poorly, and that the musical had failed to bring the story up to date.
What would you do to update it then?
I'll tell you what you do, right? She's not a straight down the line prostitute. She is a woman on OnlyFans, and Richard Gere slides into her DMs, or maybe she slides into his DMs. And then I suppose maybe if we position her as the instigator, more of a clear-cut protagonist, because she's like, oh, this rich guy, nice. Actually, you could do that quite nice. If you made a film about her as the protagonist, him very much a supporting role, and she's like, I'm just going to rinse this guy for a load of money, but then she finds herself becoming emotionally attached and the conflict that comes from that. I think you could do that. Anyway, thanks guys. Thanks for listening. Bye.